In March of 1996, I was taken to a psychiatric hospital and restrained to a bed, a little bit like this guy. My family was devastated when the psychiatrist said that I could have bipolar disorder or even schizophrenia. But I wasn't worried. What seemed insanity to everyone around me, to me seemed more like a spiritual awakening, the most sacred and special experience of my entire life. But what I didn't know until I studied the work of visionary psychiatrists like Dr. Carl Jung, Dr. Lauren Mosher, Dr. John Weir Perry, and especially Dr. Stan Grof, was that many people diagnosed bipolar also have very powerful spiritual experiences very similar to my own, and that these experiences all start with a collapse of the ego. And while not always, usually this ego collapse is caused by a period of radical change in a person's life. Now, what exactly is an ego? Well, that's not such an easy thing to explain because in our society we say like, oh, this guy's got a big ego, and we talk about it like that. But that's not really it. The ego is our false self. It's who we think we are, but we're not. And the best analogy I can come up with is to imagine that you're a baby chick and that you're inside the egg. But you also think that you're the eggshell. The eggshell is you, and in that sense, that's what our ego is. Our ego is the shell around us that we use to protect ourselves, but at the same time it limits us. It limits our full potential. So eventually we need to break out of that ego, or shell, in order to grow. So just to give you an example of what an ego is like an egg. And here we have Bill Shatner's false self, his egg, his ego. And a big part of Bill Shatner's ego is that he's 19 years old and he considers himself his dad's son. Bill and his father have a great relationship, he respects him a lot, and that's a big part of who he thinks he is. I am my dad's son. He's also Sue's boyfriend. Sue is his longtime girlfriend, they've been dating for a couple of years, and he's proud of that relationship as well. Another relationship that's very close to him is his relationship with his city, New York. He considers himself a true New Yorker, he's a Yankees fan, and he really wouldn't live anywhere else if you asked him at this point in his life. And being a true New Yorker, for him, life is all about success. If you're not a winner, then you're a loser, and get out of the way. And so Bill is very competitive, and as part of that competitive nature, he considers himself to be a very good student. He studies very hard, takes his studies very seriously, and as part of being a good student, he's working hard to get into a good university. He's also a Christian. His family is Christian, and he was raised reading the Bible. He goes to church on Sundays, and the values and the beliefs of Christianity are very close to him. So all of these different aspects of Bill's life, his religion, his relationships, his attitudes towards life, his desire to get into a good university, his city, all of these things compose who he thinks he really is on a subconscious level, and they all represent parts of his ego that he shows the world, in a sense his false self. And because he works very hard to maintain this image of himself, he has a lot of worries like, what if I don't get into a good university? Or what if I lose the people that are close to me? These sorts of things. The ego causes a lot of fear. But then something happens. His father dies, and that is a very traumatic experience for him. He really doesn't know what to do with himself, and he suffers greatly with this death. He suffers so much that when it comes time to study for his exams, he really doesn't study very much, and he fails his exams. But to his surprise, he finds that in failing, he really doesn't care that much that he failed, and he really didn't care about university the way he used to. Maybe university was something that his father wanted for him more than he did. But along with that, what happens to him as the great student? He starts to wonder, well, am I a failure? What's wrong with me? I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know why I'm pushing myself so hard. And so with his father's death, he starts to question a lot of things in his life, and as part of this questioning, he finds himself going deeper and deeper into a depression. And it's at this point that his girlfriend Sue leaves him because she just can't stand to be around a guy who's depressed all the time. And with that breakup, he really starts to question his values now. And he starts to think to himself, you know what? Ever since my dad died, I want a simpler life. Life is not about success and hard charging for me. Life is about simplicity. That's what I want my life to be about. And with that shift in values, he starts to look in different directions. And one of the directions he looks is Arizona. He decides to enroll at the University of Arizona, where he chooses to start a whole new life. But once out there, what happens to his Christianity? Well, it kind of goes up in the air because he meets all of these New Age people with completely different beliefs than what he was raised with, and they've just got this other way of looking at the world. It's very mystical. They do a lot of tarot card reading and massage, and he really doesn't believe in all that stuff, but he doesn't really know what to believe of his Christianity anymore either. And so with that, he starts to feel a little bit strange, a little lost. So many changes have happened to him so fast, and so much of his old identity, of who he thought he was, has just disappeared overnight. It all leaves him feeling like his feet are not quite touching the ground. Then, in the middle of all this change, Bill might find himself at a party, and he's had a few drinks, maybe a little marijuana, and then boom, a total ego collapse. Everything he thought about himself seems to have disappeared. He doesn't know who he is anymore. All he knows is he's got this huge surge of energy pulsating through his body, and this energy is literally taking him on a journey. He's going to a place that he's never visited. He's taking a journey into his very own soul. You literally feel your soul awakening and all of your senses coming up so strongly in this manic process that you don't really know what to do with yourself, and you're really confused. You start to ask yourself questions. What is reality? What's real? Am I going crazy? Am I dead? Am I dreaming? I don't know. Who am I becomes a very important question once you're capable of even asking yourself the question. Because let me tell you, it's a mad and mystic journey, but when possible, it should not be suppressed. Now, it's important to point out that for some people, these experiences may be very scary, and they may in fact be better off taking medications to stop the experience. However, for many others, what we know today as an acute psychosis has the potential of being a tremendously healing spiritual experience, something which can truly transform a person's life for the better. The trouble is, with the way our society aggressively handles people in these experiences, the opportunity for healing rarely happens. You see, even in the most ideal situations, there will be parts of the experience that are very difficult, even painful to go through, and to make it through, most people are going to need very compassionate support. But unfortunately, this type of support is rarely given because as a society, we have very little understanding of these experiences, and as a result, we're very fearful of them. And that's why it's the mission of my YouTube channel, Bipolar or Waking Up, to let people know that once you deeply understand the nature of these otherworldly experiences, you'll see that in truth, they are far from the meaningless madness which our society says they are. In fact, if your manic episode was anything like Bill's or my own, it might just turn out to be the most important experience of your life. Now, what can trigger an ego collapse? Well, it could be almost anything, but for most people, like Bill, it's the combination of a series of powerful life events and changes that cause the first experience of the collapse of the ego. In my last video, I talked about how various traumas, repressions, and different energies need to come out of us during periods of psychosis in order for us to heal bipolar disorder. However, there is one part of the healing that, while not so disturbing for the bipolar person, can be extremely disturbing for our families. So disturbing, in fact, that they could motivate them to want you medicated for your entire life. And what is this horrific thing that needs to be stopped at all costs? The truth. Family secrets. Everybody's got them. And they're not all so horrible. For example, when I found out when I was about 15 that every time my grandfather talked about his time in college, he was actually talking about the time he spent in jail for fraud. As it turned out, for years, college had been the family code word for prison. And then there was the time I found out I was part Micmac Indian. Actually, I found that pretty cool. However, for most of us, the truths we need to talk about during psychosis are much more serious than that. Family secrets such as rape or incest, if mentioned, can tear apart the entire family structure. Now, these secrets could be of a personal nature, like telling the family that you're gay. It could be just stating the obvious, like perhaps that your parents haven't loved each other for 20 years, even though they keep acting like they do. Or it could be something that you did that you consider to be a sin. And it was from working with a few people in psychosis, as well as receiving a lot of emails, that I gained a new appreciation for the ritual of confession within the Catholic Church. Because it became apparent to me that a lot of us, maybe all of us, are carrying around stuff that we want to get off our chest. Now, in my case, my parents were quite receptive to what I had to say, but I know for the most part, parents usually aren't. Typical responses from parents when bipolar people bring up the truth are things like, well, what are you getting so emotional about? Or, you're crazy, your thoughts are wrong. Or, I don't understand you, haven't we given you a good life? These are all ways that the family denies the truth of what the bipolar person is saying. And then to make matters worse, when confronted with all this truth, they take the person to the psychiatrist, who covers the whole thing over with the biggest lie of all, which is that the person is mentally ill. That's why they're having these thoughts and feelings. The reason they're mentally ill is they've got a chemical imbalance, they need drugs, and their thoughts and feelings are basically to be ignored. And of course, this is a huge relief for the family, who can now wash their hands of the whole experience, knowing that there's nothing really wrong with them or their family. The only problem is that their daughter has a little bit too much serotonin going to the brain. Or maybe it's dopamine. Or maybe it's not enough serotonin. I don't know, I get mixed up. So when the opportunity presents itself, clearing of the conscience of personal secrets, family secrets, untold truths, sins of the past, can be a very healing experience when you're in psychosis. Now, there's one family secret that is, in a sense, universal to all families, and yet most people are completely unaware of it. And that secret is that on this planet today, it is highly unlikely that you are going to have two parents that love you unconditionally. What is far more likely, even in the best of families, even in the most healthy of families, is that you may have one parent that loves you unconditionally. You feel their presence of love anytime you're with them, and you feel that you can do no wrong with that one parent, but the other parent will never give you a break, never let you feel like you're completely worthy of their love. If you're doing well in high school, they'll push you, why aren't you getting a part-time job? Once you graduate university, they'll be pushing you to get a full-time job. Then once you've got that, when are you getting married? When are you having kids? When are you planning for your retirement? It never ends. So why does your father or mother do that to you? Why do they hold back love? Well, they don't do it consciously. They do it because their father or mother, your grandparents, held back love from them. And the reason your grandparents held back love is because your great-grandparents held back even more love. In fact, the further you go back in time, generation to generation, what you'll see is an increasing level of general coldness and rigidity among the generations. And that's because the further back you go in your family history, the lower the level of consciousness you will encounter among the people there. And with a lower level of consciousness comes a lower capacity for compassion, not only with your own family, but with other people around you. And the two best examples of this lower level of consciousness is what was going on with women's rights 100 years ago. Basically, women weren't even treated as citizens. And then, of course, there's the racism. You really think Barack Obama would have beat Teddy Roosevelt? Somehow, I think not. Now, please keep in mind when I talk about a generation, I am referring generally, and that in any generation of people or in any culture, some people were ahead of others. So that someone like Abe Lincoln or Nelson Mandela were clearly ahead of the level of consciousness of their own cultures. And what's the end result of receiving this coldness that has come down from our ancestors? Well, it basically leaves us with a feeling of a void in our soul, a sense of emptiness in our life, because we didn't receive all of the unconditional love that we could have when we were young. Now, the good news is that there's a tremendous opportunity to heal this void in the soul when a person's in psychosis. The only trouble is how you go about healing this void in the soul is very controversial in itself. Because what it requires is that when the person in psychosis asks for affectionate love, that love be delivered by the support people or by the therapist. So in practical terms, what that means is that the person in psychosis may look to a supporter for a tremendously warm, affectionate, loving embrace. And while the support person needs to maintain the sacred spirit of the experience, not allowing things to become sexual, the intensity of affection shared could be extremely intimate, the type that we usually only reserve for our lovers. Now, this kind of contact is considered illegal today because of the risk of sexual impropriety. And in fact, the great psychiatrist Dr. John Weir Perry lost his license because he was providing this kind of warm affection to female clients. However, Dr. Stangroff insists on the therapeutic benefits of this approach, saying that basically once your soul's void is filled, you're no longer looking for mother figures or father figures in your relationships, and you can find someone that's better suited to your true personality. So just to finish off, whether you're trying to fill this soul's void, or whether you're trying to speak truths or personal secrets that have been hidden for years, both of these movements are trying to bring a deeper level of integrity to your life as you move forward. So while what you're doing or saying may shock people or rock the boat for a short period of time, down the road these movements are going to make for a better life for you, making you healthier and more alive. It'll also allow you to raise your kids, whenever you have them, with a little more warmth than you had growing up. And finally, please remember that while all of these issues have a lot to do with our families, especially our parents, try to keep in mind that chances are if you've got it rough, probably your parents had it even tougher from their parents, and that the people out there with the biggest problems to deal with are the people with no parents at all. Next up, how to deal with and heal aggression during psychosis.